today is going to be a little bit different just because there is a lack of curriculum and a lack of Indigenous rights and Native law taught at Georgetown University. So our panel will start with some background information so you guys are all well educated on the multiple jurisdictions tribal people are subject to and on the treaty rights that were violated originally behind all of this. And so Marissa will explain some of that, but feel free at the end to ask questions. Write them down throughout if you have questions. We'll give you time to ask the panelists your questions at the end.
And I think another theme we want to emphasize is we've seen a lot in the news about protesters and violence with protesters. And this is not, what's going on at Standing Rock is not a protest against capitalism, even though that's certainly brought into it. This is thought of by the tribes as a sacred and solemn act that they have to do to protect the water that is their life. So we're going to try to kind of cover some of those misconceptions, but also the long historical and legal context that the Standing Rock situation is happening within. Okay. Here are our panelists again. The Dakota Access Pipeline, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, but it's built by a Texas-based company called Energy Transfer Partners. It's designed to transfer 570,000 barrels of crude oil daily. The property tax revenues are going to be about $55 million annually, which is why there's incentive for the states, which this pipeline is going through, to deploy police officers and to make sure that this pipeline is built. And Energy Transfer Partners are expected to gross about $1.37 billion annually. The reason that the tribes are worried is because, A, there's a water protection issue. So you can see where the proposed Dakota Access Pipeline is, and the lake that serves as a water source for the Standing Rock Sioux, the Cheyenne River Sioux, and it's very clear that there are incidents all the time for leaks and ruptures of oil and gas pipelines. In addition, there are sacred site issues. So on September 2nd, 2016, Standing Rock Sioux filed the burial grounds locations for review with the State Historic Preservation Office. They had just found out that this sacred site was there. Before the SHPO could do its review on that Labor Day weekend, and the next day on a Saturday, the Dakota Access Pipeline crews went out and bulldozed the entire sacred site. So they'd essentially rather pay the fees and fines for doing that than deal with having to comply with laws that would make them have to take into account the sacred sites that desecrate them and pay rather than pay respect. As we go into the treaty law, I'd like to ask Professor Munchie to talk about how property rights have kind of informed this larger picture in terms of indigenous rights and land takings that have been going on for about 200 years.
So let me first just sort of reintroduce myself a little bit as somebody who isn't really an expert on Indian law. I've been closer to immigration law, and but you all introduced yourselves as Indian. In a way, I want to introduce myself as another kind of Indian. It's sort of an awkward sort of infelicity, right? But it's a kind of long history of colonialism that sort of brings me, to this country and explains part of the misrecognition of the one, mistaking of one Indian for the other. But that's just to say, I've come to this sort of as somebody who's interested in thinking about displacement from an immigrant perspective. And embarrassingly for me, it was only relatively recently that I started to wonder what is the difference between an immigrant and a settler, right? And specifically with respect to Asian immigration. That's a little different from others who are migrating from within the continent. And so I guess I kind of come to this issue with a little bit of humility, trying to think about the role that those of us who sort of are in the position of immigrant and settler play with respect to the long, ongoing, unfolding history of indigenous dispossession and displacement. So that said, I think it should be clear to most of us that property law and the property law curriculum plays a role in that, right? Property law plays a role in the material dispossession of indigenous peoples. It has for 300 years. So does the property law curriculum in the way it's currently configured also participate in a kind of secondary violence of erasing the history of indigenous sovereignty, indigenous claims, right? So most of us learn in our first day of property law that our country was founded on the dispossession of indigenous peoples. In Johnson v. McIntosh, Justice Marshall, John Marshall, authored a decision that effectively transferred possession of the continent from those who had been living here for centuries to European conquerors who supposedly discovered it. And with that case, of course, the court not just legitimated land theft, but it also laid the groundwork for an extermination, right? I think we have to remember the extreme violence that was authorized by that original decision. Okay, so although most of us who teach property law or have taken property law often kind of begin with the case, there's a way in which we consign that original violence to the past. And I think that's true about the way in which we think about colonization in the U.S. generally, right? We think it's a sort of closed prefatory chapter almost. But I think that the action in Standing Rock is a vivid reminder that the period of conquest is not over, it's not done, and that the dispossession of indigenous communities is ongoing, and that it continues in our name. And so when we position ourselves as settlers and immigrants, we have to remind ourselves that we are situated in a relationship of colonialism, right? We sort of like, we're implicated. So apart from that, I want to suggest that even more broadly, conquest and colonialism continue to shape the whole of property law in ways that are seldom addressed. And that's to say that indigenous displacement is not an aberration of the system, it's not an instance of market failure. Instead, it's constitutive of a market economy, a legal and political order, which has yet to be redressed, right? So we can think generally about the way the production of racialized difference, the devaluation of non-white bodies, and the continuous division and appropriation of spaces. These are all routine functions and defining features of our contemporary racial capitalism, the way value is created and destroyed, and entirely the work of property law, right? And so then I think that sort of raises a question for us. I think this is the last point I'll make. Standing Rock, I think, raises an important series of questions for us as lawyers, scholars, citizens, and students, and that is, if we recognize that our legal institutions have been founded in conquest and colonization, then what does it mean to decolonize law? And what does it mean to decolonize legal education, right? And that is an enormous question. It's one that will be hard to undertake in the immediate sort of context. But I think at the very least, it starts with something I tried to begin with, which is just something like a settler reckoning, right? We have to recognize that most of us are beneficiaries of entrenched structures of settler colonialism, and we have to recognize that the relations of settler colonialism are reproduced not only through material structures, but through ideological and knowledge structures, right? So education has always played a role in reproducing inequality and injustice forms of colonialism. So that means that decolonizing means unlearning in some respects. That means we have to sort of dismantle some of our founding myths, some of the founding myths that structure our legal curriculum. And again, I think like a really remarkable feature of the Standing Rock resistance is that they're articulating, the protesters and protectors are articulating claims and interests that ultimately are incommensurable with some of the founding norms of our legal system, right? And decolonizing legal education, I think, also entails relearning. And this is where I think, those of us who are closer to this community can probably help us. But we might think about what it means to sort of relearn a relationship to the land that does not reduce land to property, but as some of the Standing Rock activists have shown us, recognize that land is also a resource for arranging humane relationships with one another, a relationship to the past and futurity, and peaceful solidarity. Peaceful sustainability.
Thank you. And I think that a nexus to what we do in law school of what Dr. Monchi is talking about is that the 1L curriculum, your property classes were most likely devoid of any type of property law as it relates to indigenous rights, and probably devoid of treaties in general, even though treaties are some of the most supreme law of the land on par with the Constitution. When it comes to the type of people that we don't want to enforce treaties in favor of, they tend to be completely overlooked as if they are just guidance. And so, with regard to the treaties, they govern what's going on in Standing Rock right now. There's a little bit of history. So, in 1851, there was a treaty that was created between many tribes that resided in the general areas: Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming. And it was the Treaty of Fort Laramie. It was basically a multi-tribe, peaceful treaty. And the tribes agreed to allow the United States to construct roads for safe passage and a few military outposts. And there was about $100,000 given to the United States government to the representatives that went out there to negotiate that treaty and to pay the tribes for that annually. The United States did not pay the tribes. Not only did they not pay the tribes, but they began to encroach on the tribal lands. They built military forts, trading outposts, permanent settlements. So, you know, when Dr. Munchie says that colonization is not an aberration, it's how value is created, this was how they were creating value for themselves by essentially colonizing and writing over the property rights of the people who had been there long before anyone else set foot on the continent. So there were growing hostilities and altercations, and that led to a renegotiation of the Treaty of 1858, which was essentially just a reiteration, except for the original boundaries that the Sioux Nation had were this big piece right here, which you can see encompasses where the pipeline comes through. It's the one that showed like this, but all of that land was theirs. In 1868, the boundary turned into this, which is essentially just right here. For no reason other than there was no parity between the negotiating parties. And just to give you some context when I talk about hostilities and altercations and the climate of the United States at that time, the year 1858, the year 1859, California passed a scalping bounty law. So this was not a friendly neighborhood dispute type of thing. And it was very one-sided in terms of power distribution. The United States continued to violate these rights. In 1876, gold was discovered in the Black Hills, which was in land that belonged to the Sioux. So the U.S. violated the treaty. They attacked the Sioux and they seized the Black Hills in what came to be known as the Battle of Little Bighorn, where approximately 300 Native Americans died. And then in 1889, the United States violated the treaty again, which begs the question, why do we even refer to the treaty if no one abides by it? And they broke up the Sioux Nation into 5 smaller reservations that you can kind of see right here. So it's these darker parts. And they actually just miss right here where the pipeline would go through. But the original Sioux boundary covered where the pipeline goes through, and actually that original treaty was never abrogated, so it is still good law. So anyone that tells you that this is not land that belongs to the Sioux is incorrect. Mr. Rogers, do you have anything to say on these types of?
Well, I think that is, thank you for those remarks. Thank you all. And thank the students for having your attention here. It was really heartening to me to see how many people in the room. I really expected maybe a dozen. And I don't mean that disparagingly in any way, but that's kind of, you know, the attention that Native Americans get. Unfortunately, we have to have conflict now to get attention. And I think one thing that's striking me about the legal property system is when I talk to different people, I always say that, you know, education is not seeing new things, it's seeing new eyes. So before I ever give a remark, I always ask people to close their eyes and then open them again, because you're physically manifesting what you should be doing. Being a Blackfeet Irishman, I always have a chip on both shoulders, so I always tell people I'm extremely well balanced. A good friend of mine said, Tom, being IRA Catholic on your father's side and being Blackfeet on your mother's side, you would have been shot or hung if you would have been born 150 years ago, which is probably true. I could probably be shot and even hung right now. But you should use, as the history is laid out here, and what Marissa didn't tell you in addition to the bounty laws, 1849 was the greatest year for the California gold rush. So every time I see the San Francisco 49ers play, I kind of swallow hard. Because in 1849, there were about 300,000 Native Americans in California. In 1870, there were about 15,000. And they didn't die from Alzheimer's. Can you imagine if we would, in this society, in this day and age, went from 300 million to 15 million in the space of one generation? When I was a sophomore in high school, I got kicked out of my sophomore class because I was asked, Tom, can we provide the definition of manifest destiny? So I raised my hand and I said, Lebensraum. And the professor and the teacher goes, Tom, we're not talking about World War II or Hitler's turn to the east and Poland and the Slavic countries. I said, I know, professor, but I mean a professor, but my teacher there at that time, Mr. Durnfield, who was the football coach, who was teaching us history. And I said, but what happened here is it was always about living space. It always has been. We were taught as young children manifest destiny. I mean, really? Europeans come to America, and the two greatest scars on our nation's soul are slavery and the genocide of the indigenous population. I'm saying that, genocide. That's what occurred in this country. And you got to get comfortable saying that and being aware of it. But really, it was your divine right, not you, but rhetorically, your divine right to occupy the coast from Massachusetts all the way to Washington and slaughter and kill and maim just because you wanted it, because it was yours, because you thought it was yours. So when you see this argument, we're talking about property and we're talking about, but what underlies all of that and underpins all of that is it's always been about the land. And we'll break our word, we'll lie, we'll frame a false narrative. That's what's happening now. You're going to see what's emanating out of this energy company. Oh, there was adequate consultation. And we'll cloak it under whether there was consultation under the National Historical Preservation Act. Okay. Or we'll cloak it whether it was under NEPA. Or we'll cloak it all of these terms. Like people, what's NEPA? The question is, did you break your word? Are you honorable men and women? Are you honorable men and women who will honor their word? You cannot get past the fact, even with the energy transfer partner, you cannot get past the fact. This is the country. Do we really have to go here? Of Wounded Knee? Of the Black Hills? Of Manifest Destiny? Of a population, one of my closest friends is in the back row there, a Sioux tribal member, Mark Van Norman. Of people of extreme poverty? Look, we're at Georgetown. There's cranes going up all around us. A Jesuit school. And when you go out to the Dakotas and you see the distance and the poverty and the lack of hope and the cyclical nature of the drugs and the suicide and now really, you didn't quite get it all and now you want more. So while we talk about the very specific types of laws like the National Historical Preservation Act, NEPA, consultation per President Obama, consultation on the act itself, forget that. Those are the terms. What this is about is one's morality, one's word. This is wrong. You know it's wrong. And I'm so sorry that my generation, the greediest, most narcissistic generation that has ever exhibited in this country's history, the baby boomers. Thank God they're exiting. But you, it's upon you. You know what's right and wrong. You know what trust is about because you didn't have any trust. You didn't have any trust with regard to the economy. We left you the 07-08 recession. We gave you a false war. We just had what occurred here, 3 weeks ago? Why would you trust anybody? I wouldn't if I were you. Trust yourself. Most importantly, you know, and I've known this from what's very hard, and there's nothing like doing in the world I live in. It's extremely lonely. Extremely lonely. Because you can only really trust yourself. But you know what is right and wrong. You do. It's the doing that's hard. I can't tell you. You're at law school now, and you're confronted with all these norms and regulations and laws and stuff, but it's all about morality. That's what the tax code is, that's what the property law is about. So really reflect when you hear this and you hear from us speak, that it is ultimately what is about right. You know what is right and wrong. But go one step further. Go from empathy and move to compassion. And go from compassion and move to action. Remember when Rosa Parks left this world, her obituary in the New York Times was a page and a half for the action she took. What's yours going to be? The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I read the obituaries. I know it sounds macabre and weird. But you know why? That's the ultimate statement on your life. So, with all that underpinning this, but when you see this and the emotion of it, move from empathy, oh my God, how can that be for those poor people, to compassion, oh, what can I do about it, to action. That's what you should do. Sorry.
Oh, no problem. That was great. And talking about, moving into action, Professor Chambers, you, I know, litigate cases on like reservation boundary issues. Do you see more empathy and compassion being used now, currently, as these issues are in the courts and before you and the way you work, or do you see them kind of treated with the same lack of respect?
Well, thank you. I'll try to be brief because there are many of you here who will perhaps want to ask some questions. Well, I think things are a lot better now than they were 40 years ago, 45 years ago, when I started practicing Indian law. And what was it, 1977, I started teaching the course that Kennedy took here at the law school last fall. And this is the biggest class in Indian law I've had here. You all have a chance to take the course next October, September, October, if you choose to do it. I think things have gotten better, and they've gotten better because of what this gentleman, this Irish Blackfeet guy, ganging up with Blackfeet on me today, two of you at least anyway, is talking about action that Indian people have taken. What's really happening, I think, out there in Standing Rock is a lot of courage by the tribal leaders, by Dave Arshan. I should disclose, Standing Rock is a client of my law firm, and you mentioned a reservation boundary case. I won the reservation boundary case in Standing Rock, the Long Elm case, in 1977. So trying to keep reservation boundaries intact is really key. I want to ask, before I say anything else, have any of you actually been out on the ground at Standing Rock at Cannonball in the last few months? So in this time, anyone else? I mean, I sure welcome your thoughts. I have just really one thing to say about this. And Mark, you're hiding back there. I haven't seen you till you got identified. Mark knows the facts about this every bit as well as I do. What I'm going to talk about is what's happened since the Second World War. And Mark, you might want to supplement it with Cheyenne River, which I don't know as well. But at Standing Rock, I'm sorry, if you look here, you see a bunch of things called lakes. Sounds nice, Lake Sacagawea, well named after Sacagawea, the guide, Indian lady who guided the Lewis McCarthy exhibition. That's nice, isn't it? Lake Oahe. That means, what does that mean in Sioux? Do you know anyone
Meeting
know it?
place.
It's a Sioux word, and it means, I can't recall. Healing, okay. Then you've got down here, you've got a couple more lakes, smaller lakes. What you've really got, and what was built at the end of the Second World War, was a plan by the people who were fighting to authorize the Dakota Pipeline, the Corps of Engineers, and the Bureau of Reclamation. There was a plan to flood essentially the lands on every Indian reservation along the Missouri River. Blackfeet was lucky, you're on tributaries, so you're up at the headwaters.
You just had to give them Glacier Park.
Well, you did have
Going
to
to
do
the
that. But if you look along the Missouri River, dams were built to flood out every Indian reservation in the Dakotas. So all of these reservations that you were talking about that were set up in the 1889 Act as separate reservations out of the Great Sioux Reservation. What the Corps did is exactly what they're doing now. They built dams right below the Indian reservations and flooded them out. Now, what did this mean for the Indian people? At Fort Berthold in North Dakota, where Lake Sacagawea is, they built a huge lake right in the middle of the Indian reservation, where all the people lived. They disrupted the communities there. They had to relocate them, and the people on one side of the lake have to drive a long way around to get to the people on the other side of the lake. They're cousins, they're brothers and sisters, they're relatives, they're family. At Standing Rock, they flooded out a community called Kennel. Now, there is a community called Kennel at Standing Rock today, but it is way up on a hill, up on a bluff. Kennel used to be down on the good bottomlands of the river, the most fertile lands at Standing Rock. The eastern boundary of Standing Rock is the Missouri River, same at Cheyenne River, and I think same at Crow Creek and Lower Brule. What all of these dams did is they flooded out all the good agricultural lands and the communities where the people lived, and they had to relocate up on bluffs. And so now that is, so what the United States did in the 40s and 50s was take all the good lands on, or most of the good lands on these reservations, and flood them out. And now they're coming back for more with this core effort to authorize this Dakota Pipeline. So I think it's being fought really on, legal issues we can talk about, but we don't have time. I'm sure this lady wants to talk, and I really would like to hear your experience and what you did out there and what you saw out there. That the Standing Rock people are brave and resolute people, and they're standing firm, and they've got lots of allies. Lots of tribes around the country have sent people, and lots of non-Indians have gone there. And if this thing is going to be stopped, it's going to be stopped by that as much, I think, as any legal issues in the court. Ultimately, it is true, manifest destiny is meant that the United States can go and dispossess Indian people, and legally there's a doctrine that's unfortunate. It's an Indian Dred Scott decision, it's been called, but it does allow Congress to displace Indian people. Congress really hasn't done that here, though. The Corps of Engineers is trying to do it. The Corps of Engineers has a legal trust responsibility, as does every executive agency of the United States, to protect Indian treaty rights. It should be doing it. To their credit, a lot of people within the federal government are fighting hard to bring that about. The solicitor at the Interior Department, the assistant secretary at the Interior Department, officials at the Justice Department, where Mark used to be in charge of the Indian justice Center, and I guess where you worked, didn't you? You worked with Tracy Toulouse.
Oh, yeah, on the paper.
Yeah, so there are a lot of people trying to do a lot of good things and try to adhere to the trust responsibility and not allow this kind of taking. But ultimately, I think it'll be the courage of the Indian people that will stop it. Thank you.
And I'm glad you bring up the dam issue because that's kind of at the center of what's going on here in terms of, I'm sure people wonder why the Army Corps of Engineers is even involved. But it was pursuant to the Flood Control Act of 1944, the Army Corps of Engineers condemned this land and went in and built the Waukee Dam and paid little to no compensation. The Sioux sued and won a settlement, but I think they were only able to use the interest off of that settlement for social projects. So they didn't get their actual $90,000. So they really got nothing. When they built this dam, it destroyed 90% of the Sioux's timberland. Also, a lot of the fertile lands where they were growing their medicinal herbs. And it changed the tribe's water boundaries. And the Army Corps seized the riverbanks, which is this entire red area. I'm sure you don't need this to it because I have the power. And so this is really, where the side of the dispute is, because all of this red land is what was seized along the riverbanks. The Sioux have brought a lawsuit under several different claims against the Army Corps. However, their preliminary injunction was denied twice, so that's still pending. But they do have other legal bases. I think the bigger issue here is that the land is just theirs, but they also have these legal claims as well. I was going to play these videos, but you should check them out. It's come up to me afterwards if you want to see them, but I think they're a real testament to the fact that the people out at Standing Rock are water protectors and they're not protesters. And it's incredibly powerful to see grandmothers and people telling the police who are pushing them and shoving them that they love them. People, they're using concussion grenades. There's a woman who's probably in danger of losing her arm, a 21-year-old. They've been sprayed with water. I think it's almost about to start blizzarding out there. So, but they're out there, to protect water and the land that they care about, and have supported their people for a really long time. The December 5th eviction, super fun. The Army Corps of Engineers on November 25th, the day after Thanksgiving, sent a letter to Standing Rock basically saying that they were closing the portion of the Corps managed federal property where the water protectors are. They said it was necessary to protect the general public from violent confrontations between the protesters and law enforcement. They did establish a free speech zone, and anyone outside the zone is going to be considered trespassing and subject to prosecution. This is the basis for them doing that. It seems legit, I suppose, if you think that attacking protesters is a public health issue. The North Dakota governor also ordered a mandatory eviction. He has questions about the winter habitation integrity of the buildings where the water protectors are. He has been very ambiguous about whether or not forced removal is in play, whereas the Army Corps said they will not do forced removal, but they will arrest and they will cite. And again, any person who chooses to enter, re-enter, stay there, stays at their own risk, and assumes all corresponding liabilities. This is the free speech zone. It is very far from the site of the protest and or where the pipeline will be going through. It is very far from all the land on the riverbanks that the Army Corps took from the Sioux. And it's essentially just, over here where they're out of the way. Obviously, the tribes have not responded well, and they're not going to back down, most likely. So the Cheyenne River Sioux chair sent a letter back to the colonel, which is really awesome. There are copies of it over on that table somewhere. But I took some of my favorite quotes just because it's one of the most patriotic invocations of civil disobedience that I've ever seen. I mean, he first points out that the 1851 treaty has not been abrogated and it governs them all, and that they're no longer going to have their rights eroded. He goes into basically standing up as the leader of his tribe, saying that he would not use his authority, which is based on the consent of his citizens, to make them back down, from this peaceful prayer that they're using to protest. Again, he says perhaps the most terrifying aspect of your letter is your acknowledgement of the stark reality that the confrontation between our peaceful water protesters and law enforcement could result in death or serious injury. In the very next paragraph, you guarantee that further confrontations will occur by promising that these peaceful people will be trespassing on closed areas, and you threaten that they will do so at their own risk. And again, you use this letter, as a irresponsible threat to the water protectors, has a problem with the military's police force, basically brutalizing and terrorizing people who are simply trying to protect the environment and the land that is theirs and is very sacred to them. And I think it's very true that federal efforts to de-escalate violence should be aimed at the wrongdoers and not at the peaceful people. So now, we have this impending December 5th eviction deadline. It's come from both the North Dakota governor and from the Army Corps of Engineers. We have a very strong response from the tribes and any tribes that have come to support them, saying we will not leave through any conditions. And also on December 4th, we have a group of about 2,000 veterans coming to protect the water protectors. So if you guys have questions about that, if the panel has thoughts about how this is going to proceed, because obviously it has to proceed one way or another, and if you have any ideas about what's the best solution that's fair and very hopefully not violent.
Do you have anything you want to say,
say
sir?
that first, yes.
I mean, you've been out there on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I stayed at the Ocheti-Sakawan camp for 3 days over the break. We actually go back one slide. The first day I was there on Thanksgiving Day, I was part of a direct action, basically right at the base of that hill. And it was very peaceful action, and the basically declarations of law enforcement were almost nonsensical, claiming that any movement towards them would be considered an act of aggression, and that they didn't want a confrontation, but that if anybody came towards them, they would essentially create one. And essentially it was several hundred peaceful people linked arms in prayer and silent demonstration, essentially just very slowly and non-threateningly moving across this small creek that you can't see right there, and moving up this hillside to basically just like assert their right to be on this land that is theirs. And this went on for hours and hours, to the point of people had respirator masks and goggles on in anticipation of the police using force against them, and the police on the megaphones saying, why are you wearing masks? That's not peaceful. We consider that to be aggressive. Basically, looking for any justification they could to use force, and their crowds just thickened and thickened up top, and a lot of them had real guns, or these orange guns that fire the beanbag rounds or the rubber bullets, and fire hoses that by the time I eventually left, they were spraying on the people that were farthest up the hill. But I guess, my largest takeaway from being there for such a short time was it was just very powerful for me to be in, there's a few thousand people there probably at the camp, and to be in an environment where it felt like even though a bunch of different people all came from different backgrounds, some people were indigenous, more often than not people weren't, but that in this space, everybody was kind of united around a shared goal, and there was like this great kind of like equalizing effect where sort of everybody felt that they were in the same boat, and everybody wanted to like raise the kind of like collective state of being and help each other out, which was just very different than our normal routine. And then having the essentially like eviction notice and response happened on Friday, the day before I left. It was very, very difficult to leave on Saturday, and I'm very much looking forward to going back and trying to lead get a group of students to join me going back during the first week of January. So I'll be emailing people.
And you've highlighted something that you should really think about this, because you're at an incredible institution of learning. And I firmly believe this, that service to others is the rent your soul pays to live in this world. You will never forget what you experience. It's not materialistic. You feel lighter. I mean, you feel heavier sometimes with your emotions, but you feel lighter when you live like that. I think one thing that you really need to realize as students is there was a young man, about 2005, he was standing on the Senate floor, and he was about ready to vote on Chief Justice John Roberts' appointment to the Supreme Court. And he was talking about how Chief Justice Roberts, at that time, had all their credentials, went to all the great schools like Harvard or Princeton or wherever he might have went. But this young man, this young senator said, that's not enough. He said, that's not enough. If you want to be a truly exceptional jurist and a truly exceptional human being, you have to go farther. You have to have empathy. Because empathy is what drives you. The ability to be in another person's head, you experience, to see that out there, and to collectively raise your conscious level, to act upon that empathy. And I think we all know who that senator was. You can guess, and you win double jeopardy. That senator was Barack Obama. And he did not vote for Chief Justice Roberts, ironically. And this president, he has been probably, I think collectively we can say, I think Mark would echo this, as with my friends to the right of me, has been an incredibly trusted public official for Indian country. No doubt about it. But if the president were here, I would say this to him. It's not how you start a job, it's how you finish one. My dad used to tell me when I washed cars for him for 25 cents an hour, he said, Tom, always remember to check the wheels before you push it out the door. Well, our president has done a tremendous job, but it's time to check the wheels. And as Reed has referenced, the people at the solicitor's office and the associate Larry Roberts over there and Hillary Tompkins, that's all well and good, but that ain't enough. If you have a moment, however small that moment might be, you need to reach out to the White House. You need to reach out to your friends. You need to travel there. You need to do something. You need to get angry. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Network. You ever see that movie? Phenomenal movie. If I had 50 million, I'd make it tomorrow. Get out of your chairs and get angry. You're not put on this world just to sit there and consume food, drink, procreate. You're here to do something with your life. How do you want to be remembered? Well, you know, I went to law school and I worked at a law firm for 20 years and then I died. And I joined the country club. what are you going to do? Do something. And when you do that, after the Jack Abramoff scandal, my beautiful mother, who's 83 years old, 5 feet tall, about 85 pounds, she's Blackfeet. She called me and says, Tommy, what does it feel like? I'm watching C-SPAN and it seems like these people are horrible people. And I said, Mom, I cannot tell you what it feels like. It's the end of wanting, I told her. You don't want anymore. You've actualized what you want to be. And I cannot tell you what it feels like. The only way I can tell you what it feels like is my first love. Marie. My first love. How I was nauseous when I met her and nauseous when I left her. Left her in the sense that I knew for a reason we could not be together. But in that moment, in the time I spent with her, I recaptured it by giving to others. And that's what it feels like. And there is nothing materialistically that you will ever achieve to equate that feeling. So like this young gentleman here, do something with your life. Make it meaningful. Be ashamed if you don't. That's my suggestion.
Well, I'll pass this around. Speaking, Tom provided this. The Great Sioux Nation wrote a letter to President Obama just yesterday. We only have one copy, but we will pass around. Will the other panelists contribute as well?
And while I was giving my presentation, Dr. Betty Jacobs walked in, so good to see you, Dr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here.
Do you have any comments or suggestions?
Yes, I do. A few comments. So let me introduce myself. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I came all the way from main campus, which is not so far, but I left my class out a little early, and it wasn't enough. I am the co-founder of the Health Law Institute. I hold a faculty appointment here as well as the medical center and main campus. And I've been at Georgetown for 15 years. I am a member of Cherokee Nation and Shoshone. So I know the Great Plains. I went to school there, I worked there, I've lived there. And the Great Plains are not like any other place. What you see is vast open space, or as Europeans first came across, nothing, inhospitable in bad weather, and not much water. So John Muir, we all know from Yosemite and green, lush waterfalls, that environment. But to get to California, he had to cross the Great Plains. And because he crossed the Great Plains, he said, many people live without love. Nobody lives without water. So when you look at all that empty space, what is necessary to our life and our health is underground. And it's two things that actually need to be in harmony. One is water, which you can see, and the other is energy, which we only experience. We don't see energy. And so I feel I came at the end, and it's concluding. So this is an odd position because I feel like I'm in an ideological camp. I was at the occupation of Alcatraz. I was on Wind River when we got the settlement rights for minerals. Salish Kootenai, Montana, for water fee lands. I do know what it feels like, bonding. And I also know that in Indian country, helpers are our most conflicted allies. And, there are still people who use Indians as proxies and pawns. So I feel like I'm sitting at home, talking in non-materialistic terms and remembering the bonding of all the protests that existed in the 70s generally, Alcatraz in particular. And sustaining that momentum with people is both fragile and enduring. The Ogallala Lakota were awarded money for the Black Hills decades ago, and that money is still in the bank. And this is the poorest spot in the United States of America. They will not take the money for the Black Hills. So there is endurance. But in the last minute, I feel as if I should give the counterpoint on the other side. If I can do that in 90 seconds.
Oh, we have time.
Because it is true, dams were built where there is not a lot of water. So water is life and death. And this life and death is short term. But when we sit together and talk among ourselves, we're not realizing that Indians were not targeted for dams, and dams did serve a purpose beyond destroying people's homes. South of Charlottesville in Virginia is Smith Mountain Lake, and under that lake is an entire city. So if you dive under it, you will see houses, you can walk in the doors. This was part of the distribution of water to people who didn't have it. How many people have lived for a month where you had to walk more than half a mile to get water to drink or to wash? May I see a hand? Without water, and water is not distributed without energy. So it might be there, but it's not where you need it. These things are complicated, and there are also layers. Indians are there for the purpose of the claim and the injunction. It's 97% built, so we'll see what that is. And treaties are important. These are old treaties. They are honored by spirit rather than what's written, because the words are not exactly, the circumstances are not the same. Sovereignty is great. Richard Nixon ended the Vietnam War, founded the EPA, and signed Indian Self-Determination Act, which is a cornerstone of what it means to live as an Indian. But there are other reasons Indians are there, and one is to assert sovereignty and self-determination, irrespective of the outcome. And when bad weather comes, you lose a lot of friends. The 2,000 people on Facebook who are veterans are supposed to show up. 2,000 people won't show up. We'll see how many people show up. But as you said, it's how many people stay the course and how bonds are made. Some bonds are very enduring, but this is absolutely the notion of harmony. Because what you see in the Great Plains as you drive across, but if you had to walk across, you would be troubled, and mostly because of water. those are long, long distances. So Wyoming, where I'm from, 100,000 square miles, 450,000 people. You can drive for hours and not see anything. You know, I think the purpose, the imagination is strengthened if you understand the counterpoint and the sense of harmony. We need water. We must be good stewards of water, protectors. It is a natural extension of that spirit of the treaty. But we need energy. And the first people to fall without energy, look at Africa, half the continent does not have electricity. That means, I was in Mozambique, the capital city. When water goes out in the capital city, it's because there's no energy. Because it's not uphill. It's not like California, where LA and San Francisco get water simply because of gravity. You have to move it. And you need energy for distribution for all the things that you get here. And I feel like I wound up on the wrong side of the team that I feel like I'm part of. But if you don't understand the total and complexity, you can be shocked at the outcome. And having been shocked recently at outcomes, I feel this is an important lesson to learn. But the camaraderie of spiritual people in our place, it is a wonderful thing to share. And then just the camaraderie of protesting something, which is interesting because you gather to break laws that actually are making the point of changing laws that you believe in. In some ways, it's a legal order itself. So I've used up more time and confused the issue at the very end.
Okay, well, thank you. Just in the interest of time, we are going to open up just for a few minutes of questions for everyone. And as she was mentioning, you know, this is a big energy pipeline. It will transfer hundreds of thousands of gallons a day, and that will save the environment in other ways as well. They won't have to truck that oil and stuff like that. But these pipelines do break. All of them break eventually, including hundreds of leaks and still hundreds of thousands of gallons. So it's not if it'll break, it really is when it will break. So can I have any questions for the panel?
Actually, I'm just about to run, but I'm Emily. I'm with the Environmental Law Society. We've been working with other great organizations here today to put together a short list of some action items that we can take on pro bono here in DC. So if you're not able to physically go to Standing Rock over the break or any time that opportunity might be coming up, and Alex can talk more about that, you can get in touch with me. We have a variety of research projects and action items that are sort of a short list of things that you can do from sort of looking comprehensively at the different, we're doing FOIA requests, we're reviewing the NEPA, and permitting from Army Corps. So if you're interested in getting involved with that and sort of doing on-the-ground stuff here in Washington, get a hold of me or the Environmental Law Society generally, and you can get engaged that way here.
Anyone else? In the back?
Yeah. Oh, hi. I'm Mark Van Orman. I'm not really part of your class or anything, but you had an interesting topic, and my friend Tom was on the panel, so I thought I'd come and sit in. And I've been colleagues with Reed for a long time. I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. I've been out to the camp. I've been working with the Oglala Sioux Tribe and the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe on the pipeline questions. I think the treaty is the law, and I think that you have to understand that the tribes own that water in the river, and it's not a question of when, but if. Not a question of if, but when that pipeline's going to leak. And so you're really talking about drinking water, because people are drinking the water out of the river. All of the tribes along the river have pipelines that go down into the river to take that water out. Now, it wasn't built for drinking water, it was built for flood control, but there was a bargain with the tribes, and the tribes gave up substantial lands, and the bargain was that it would be there for the tribe's benefit, for economic development, for recreation. That's part of the statutory background for the creation of Lake Oahe. It's in the organic statutes. The Army Corps is on notice of all of that, and they should have consulted with the tribes and worked with the tribes. There was an easy solution to avoid this. They could have gone north and east of the river, and they wouldn't have to cross the water where they're going to spill the oil and pollute everybody's drinking water. So there are sacred sites up there. The tribes own that water. It relates to the reservation as a permanent home. That's the treaty provision that's important here. The reservation is a permanent homeland. Our folks are not going anywhere. It's 20 million gallons a day of oil that's supposed to go across there. And it could be avoiding that crossing, and you had a nice map up there that showed if they just hooked it the other way, they could have gone north and east of the river and not had this conflict at all. The Army Corps has a policy, and it says they're supposed to consult on treaty rights, and they didn't follow their policy. And so that's where part of the problem here is. So when the tribes contacted the Attorney General and the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Defense and the President, then they did hold up and say, we want to consult with the tribes. And it's unfortunate we're coming to the end of the Obama administration, but they may take action before they leave office. In the meantime, there's kind of two things that are going on. There's the question of the pipeline, but there's a question of the safety of the water protectors. And the state and local people have been very abusive to the protesters. And the Attorney General has sent out the FBI to investigate civil rights violations. But this thing by the Army Corps to say that you're no longer, welcome there after December 5th is just, asking to create a conflict. So Senator Martin Heinrich has something on his website, which is, Martin Heinrich for Senate. He used his campaign site, and he's doing a petition to President Obama to say, hey, just like Tom said, you don't want to leave office with a situation that's like Selma Bridge. Let's reverse that Army Corps action and provide some protection for those water protectors. So if anybody wants to sign up to that, look on Martin Heinrich's website. And Martin's been very helpful. Thanks.
We have time for another question. One more question. All right, last question.
Is there something President Obama can do before he leaves office that President-elect Trump cannot just reverse as soon as he comes into office? Not to, that's a really depressing question.
That's a very good question. And Mark, I can't think of anything.
I would say that a couple of things that people are looking for is perhaps a denial of the easement, which would say that there's a federal action that, hey, that what the tribes are saying has validity, and we're going to take action to honor this request. And there might be some different ideas there about routing the pipeline somewhere further north, outside the tribe's 1851 treaty area.
Bismarck, the capital city of North Dakota, which is about 30 miles north of Cannonball.
About 50 miles. Yeah.
But Mark.
But the Bismarck people protested, so they didn't do that.
Well, Mark and reading, it's whether it's executive order or law, those can all be undone, and we're going to see that with whatever occurs here after January 20th.
This is what worries me, and I think the thing that's going to stop it is going to be the determined action of people like you and the Indian people out there, your tribe.
You have to have that moral authority. He has to use the bully pulpit and frame this issue. That's what he should do. I mean, anything he puts out there can be undone. So why don't you leave on a very incredibly moral and ethical high note when it comes to Native Americans and frame this issue for what it is. And lay that down. I mean, you look at those images of the water cannons in Selma, Alabama. Did you see the water cannons the other day? Remember, law is nothing more than a reflection of our morals and our values. That's what's
I
law.
agree that Obama could make a firm statement that would be memorable and energizing and probably not durable because there are competing forces. And NPR today, the spokesman, to the extent that one spokesman is inquired, the purpose is to stop the pipeline, period. So people who are there have different motives. One is to move the pipeline because, believe it or not, we are sitting on pipelines. And the pipeline to Westchester County has to be replaced. Before I was here, I was in an engineering company. So you also have to know everything has a risk. When you get in a car, you're taking a risk. A pipeline is not flawless, but you can anticipate when they need to be replaced. And in going under the Hudson, but when it goes into Westchester County, it is going to go over residences because there's nothing else. So we'll see how they reply. I think rerouting it could be a win-win, and everyone will pay the cost, but there will be both the result to the extent that it's not disentangled, and then the memory of Indians asserting sovereignty and self-determination. So there are two outcomes, one which is particular to the situation, and the other is particular to the entire identity of people who, with all the facts and circumstances of history, actually, it's amazing that we're here at all. And both lessons are tremendously important, but all the people are there are not united with particularly the same goal. Some do not want it on tribal land, and some do not want it at all. So, it's mixed.
But it is, with clarification, you being a Native American yourself, we've been wedged enough as a people. This is about.
Used as pawn.
Yes, this is enough. This is not about, they have their agendas. But the bottom line is, we know as Native Americans what is right. This is about the tribe. It's not about their proxies and prawns as you referenced. I don't see too many pipelines running through Georgetown that have broken up and spilled in this part. Or how about McLean? Huh? How about Manhattan? So I leave you with that thought. That we've always, the tribes with their extreme poverty and now their pollution that's occurring, we put them on isolated reservations because we didn't want to think of them. They're like a horrible aunt who's half crazy. Let's put them out of sight, out of mind, so we won't have to remember what we did to them. We know as a Native people what's right here, and it's not about stopping the pipeline altogether. It's about protecting what we have, what little we have. And that's when you were talking about framing the narrative. Frame the narrative, Mr. President. Get out there, use the bully pulpit. Speak to the people. Speak to the people like you spoke about race. Where are you? Speak to the people like you spoke about race. Speak to the people in this country about Native Americans and their history. You stood in front of all the tribal leaders a month ago and you said, tribal leaders, how did I do? Well, you've done fantastic, but you're not ending so well. You can do better, Mr. President. End well. Go back and read your Senate speech about Chief Justice Roberts. It starts with empathy. Don't leave it to the Larry Roberts of the world. It's not his job, or Hillary Tompkins. It's Barack Obama's job to tell the story to the people in this country.
We have a few more questions, and I just want to say thank you to all of you. I know this might be a little bit foreign to a lot of us, especially if you're not familiar with Native culture. but the sentiments expressed today are very much how the tribal people are viewing the situation from, and it's not always a quick jump, as we might think as legal scholars, to ask just the legal questions. There's a lot of spiritual and cultural questions underneath all of this. So I appreciate you all for taking that in and wanting to learn. So if you have any cultural or legal questions, we'll take those as well.
Thank you all again for being here. My name is Amber and I'm a 2L here. I think it's interesting, your last comment, and I think it kind of segues into what I've really been feeling a part of this conversation and just in the larger context of maybe the lack of attention that this issue has been getting. As a black woman in this country, I think that there's more that the president could have spoken on with regard to race, right? I think that he could have used his bully pulpit more in defense of the Black Lives Matter movement, for instance. And I think that this is just, when we talk about, developing more buy-in, I think, from other communities outside of Native Americans, right? Because of the genocide that was exacted upon these people and how little, I guess, resource they have to draw on, and why we need allies in this fight, right, is to be able to draw those connections and show how our leaders in a lot of ways have failed so many minorities in this country, right? And that it's not so much about which issues should be talked about, but all these things are connected, right? And we're looking at the dispossession of Native American people, but African American communities all over this country are undergoing gentrification, right? And because these individuals didn't have the resources to actually own those communities, they're being displaced, right? And so many people are ignoring that. So maybe drawing those connections, I think, is like really key for people to have that empathy, right? And to develop that compassion and not seeing these issues as separate but in fact all symptomatic of the same issues, the underlying greed, the underlying narcissism of our leaders and things of that nature. So I don't know if you can maybe speak to that. What do you think the intersectional conversation?
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, and that's why, and I was referencing, our leaders have failed us. My generation, the baby boomers, have failed us up and down the line. And it's you as activists, as young people, who need to get out there and get angry and add something additional to your lives. And then you'll be empowered, and you'll be truthful to yourself. Truthful. And I can't tell you how. It's a beautiful feeling. Because we get so little truth anymore. We just get facts, alternate reality now. Where do you go for truth? You go to your soul. That's where you get your truth. You know it. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, we thank you for coming. It's been a really great event. And thank